Our national parks are known for their incredible majestic beauty and flourishing wildlife. These are areas enjoyed by millions every single year. But all is not well in some of these parks. A dark shadow looms overhead, a dark mystery. Thousands of people disappearing without a trace. Many of these people disappearing under strange circumstances that don't make any sense and leave me scratching my head wondering as to what could be responsible. Is it Sasquatch? Alien abductions? Shady government programs? There's so many bizarre possibilities. Join me as we delve into the Mountain Beast Mysteries archives with Volume 1, Missing 411 and Strange Disappearances. The Yukon, the land of legendary big game, sprawling vast wilderness, and one of the best places on Earth to experience the auroras. A trip out to the Yukon bush is a trip to find out exactly what you're made of. And that's what you're planning, but you have nothing to worry about. You've done trips like this before all over the Yukon, and you have unparalleled levels of experience dealing with the wildlife, including an academic background in biology. You've done endless research and studies on grizzly bears. You can read them, you understand their behavior, and on top of that, you're a highly skilled bow hunter. You've been a hunting guide for ages, and people come to you to help gain knowledge and experience. People come to you to take them out into the woods, and they put their lives in your hands. Everyone knows you as the guy when it comes to hunting and recreating in the Yukon wilderness. You're a modern-day Daniel Boone, and you've earned it. In fact, it's extremely difficult to imagine someone with more experience than you. The time comes to depart on your latest adventure. You board the float plane with all your supplies, 2 weeks of supplies to be precise. 2 weeks sounds like a long time to most people, but for you, this is just another hunting trip into the bush. This is totally in your comfort zone. You fly over the vast expanse of rugged wilderness, and in doing so, you take in all of the amazing visuals that you pass over. You observe the waterways and trails, you observe the mountains, and of course, the weather. You keep a keen eye out for wildlife that may be spotted from the sky. You're extremely observant, and not much gets past you these days. Eventually you make it to the lake on which you're supposed to land on, and you're dropped off along with all of your provisions and even a small boat to the camp area on shore, at which you are to spend your next 14 days. You get straight to work setting up your new temporary home. You set up your tent, a kitchen area a safe distance away, and a place to store your food supplies. This is dangerous bear country, and there's no room for mistakes. Being lazy with food storage in this area can mean serious trouble with the bears. The North is unforgiving in that sense. So many people before you have had the serious misfortune of being eaten alive by such animals, completely ripped to shreds. While sitting at camp after dinner, you decide to just hang out and take in all of the breathtaking scenery, listening to the small waves crash in onto the lakeshore. This is living, you think to yourself. It's in that very moment when something catches your eye, something in the distance down the lakeshore. A moose. Exactly what you've come here to hunt. You're 99% sure you saw the back end of a moose walk into the brushy foliage at the edge of the water. You determine the quickest way to get to it, and also the quietest way is by boat. You waste no time grabbing your custom homemade bow and some arrows. You can't believe it. The first day here and you spot the exact animal you were hoping to hunt? Life couldn't be any better. You paddle quickly but quietly to where you believe you saw the moose. You grab your bow and carefully exit the boat, moving quietly through the brush further away from the shore until you find a nice, ideal spot to sit and wait. Little do you know that you're living the last few minutes of your life. Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the mystery of Bart Schleyer. Bart was an expert hunter. He was a scientist, essentially. He had a background in wildlife biology. He had a master's degree. The guy was basically a legend when it comes to researching bears, collaring them, studying them. He did the same kind of work with tigers in Russia. He did that work with Siberian tigers, which is absolutely outstanding. The guy loved animals. He was an expert outdoorsman. He knew everything there was to know about the areas that he visited, about hunting, about tracking, and about just existing in the outdoors as a solo guy. Like, this guy was pretty hardcore. He hunted with a handmade bow and handmade arrows, and he was just a legend in his community. Bart went missing. He was dropped off by a float plane and was supposed to be picked up 2 weeks later, but when that float plane came back to pick him up, he wasn't at his camp. He was gone. And eventually what ended up happening is they found, part of his head. And that's pretty much it. The circumstances to which he was found don't add up. Most people say he was attacked by a grizzly bear, and that's that. It was just a case of being at the wrong place at the wrong time, similar to Timothy Treadwell, the guy that was featured in the Grizzly Man documentary, who was eaten by a grizzly bear, him along with his girlfriend. They think something similar to that happened. But when you hear the story, when you hear what happened, you'll know. You'll be like, maybe there's something more going on to this story more than just a bear attack. Maybe something else was going on. Maybe something that involved a creature that we know as Sasquatch or Bigfoot. But before we go any further onto this case, let's go over what actually happened. Let's get into an article here that I dug up online about the story of what happened to Bart Schleyer. The Puzzling Death of Bart Schleyer in the Yukon Territory of Canada, published October 27, 2017. Bart Schleyer was a famous outdoorsman, hunter, and survival expert. In September of 2004, Bart went off for a trip in the Canadian wilderness. His last contact was when a chartered float plane left him at the larger of the Reed Lakes in Canada's Yukon Territory on September 14th. Reed Lakes is on the southern slope of the Selwyn Mountains, about 175 miles north of the town of Whitehorse, and the nearest settlement is Stewart Crossing, about 15 miles from the lakes on the road from Whitehorse to Dawson. He was well equipped for the trip with 3 plastic Action Packer crates with enough food for at least 2 weeks, clothing, and camp gear such as a tent and an inflatable boat. When the plane that dropped Bart off returned 2 weeks later to collect him and take him back to civilization, the experienced woodsman was gone. The pilot thought this was strange, as he was no city slicker. He knew how to handle himself in even the most remote wilderness and could be described as a survival expert. Bart was reported missing on September 30th, 2004, and the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, launched a comprehensive search and found nothing. According to the RCMP, he had lunch or supper in a camp, since the remains of a meal were found. Bart had evidently used his boat and paddled it down the lake from camp, and it was found a half a mile from the camp. The Mounties thought there was a possibility Schleyer might have hiked out to the highway, and with deteriorating weather, they called it a day. Dib Williams, a friend of Schleyer's in Whitehorse, was dissatisfied with the RCMP efforts and got pilot friend Wayne Curry to fly them to the camp after they had departed. They found Bart's tent had been knocked down, either by wind or by animals, but all the equipment was still there. They searched the area around the tent, and they found his backpack, bear spray, a knife, and a VHF radio. Williams and Curry got increasingly concerned as they didn't buy the story that Schleyer had hiked out when he left such key equipment behind. On the second day of their search, they found his bow near the inflatable boat. About 60 yards back in the woods from the boat, the bow and arrows in a handmade buckskin quiver were leaned up against a tree next to a dry bag full of gear, on which he'd probably been sitting on, and this was located on flat ground next to a thicket of black spruce and willows. Curtis, an experienced moose hunter, said it looked like the sort of place an archer might set up if trying to call a moose into range. A little further on, they found a camouflage face mask with blood and hair on it, and at this point, they called the RCMP back to the area. On October 3rd, the Mounties, Yukon conservation officers, and civilian volunteers flew back to the area to begin a more detailed grid search. At first they found little but bear and wolf tracks, but then a baseball cap was spotted by the searchers, and then camouflage pants, a camera, part of a skull, and just a few small bones. All these items were 60 meters or so from the bow and the spruce tree. The teeth in the skull allowed the subsequent identification of the remains as being Bart Schleyer. There wasn't much more of his body found. Since there was quite a bit of grizzly scat in the area, it fueled speculation that Schleyer had been unexpectedly killed and eaten by a bear, as happened with the famous Timothy Treadwell, whose death was captured in a documentary by Werner Herzog in the 2006 film Grizzly Man. Amongst some of the bear scat samples, there were some bone fragments, but no fabric. In Treadwell's case, not only were human remains found in the contents of the bear's stomach, but also large amounts of their clothing. Most of Schleyer's clothes were never found, but searchers and friends were skeptical it was a bear attack that had taken Bart out. First, there was no sign of a death struggle, no vegetation or ground had been disturbed. The remains were found in a little patch of sparse spruce lying on the moss, and if a bear had killed them, this would be unusual, as they usually bury their kills in a sort of cache. The remains of Treadwell and his girlfriend were found in such a cache after they were killed, but there was no cache anywhere in the area that searchers could locate. The Vancouver pathologist who examined Schleyer's remains found no tooth punctures in his skull, nor indications of scratch marks from teeth. When bears attack people, they almost always go for the head. Even if he started playing dead, which is a recommended tactic for surviving a grizzly bear attack, friends said he would have known that if the animal continued attacking, the only chance for survival would be to fight back, and generally speaking, a bear attack is prolonged and violent. A friend said, "I think the least likely scenario is some sort of surprise encounter, but it's hard for me to imagine having a bear sneak up on him and get him." Almost everyone who knew Schleyer believed he was simply too good of an outdoorsman, too alert while in the forest to have a bear catch him by surprise. Bart's hat, for example, was completely undamaged. If a bear had got him, it's even harder to imagine the animal killing him without leaving signs of a struggle on a site covered with soft, easily disturbed moss. An attack goes on for a long time. The audio tape of Timothy Treadwell's death goes on for many minutes, recording the sounds of him and his partner being eaten alive. The balaclava contained little blood and hair, and his pants even less. If a bear attacks a man, it won't remove his pants without them being shredded and soaked in blood. Normally bears grab the end, especially when attacking from behind, causing profuse bleeding, so why wasn't the balaclava blood-soaked? Others disagree and say that even for an experienced outdoorsman, a predatory bear could sneak up and deliver a fatal attack. The plastic container that held his food there hadn't even been disturbed, and bear experts said that if a grizzly had killed Schleyer, it is likely the same bear would have gone to the camp, given its proximity, and even eaten through the canned food. Everything points to the evidence being scavenging related, not caused by a violent direct attack. The circumstances of Bart's death are very strange, even if experts and searchers disagree with the cause. Bridget Parker, a spokeswoman for the Mounties and Whitehorse, said the case remains open, but the organization leans towards the idea that Schleyer was attacked and killed by a bear. Everything at the scene suggested a bear attack, and it did not suggest foul play. So it is very strange. Obviously, bear attacks happen all the time. They can happen when you least expect it. People can't, control nature. We like to think we can. We like to think we're the boss. But when we go out into the wilderness, things can happen that are completely out of our control. One of those things being a bear attack. And when you're up north, in the far north, in the Yukon and the Northwest Territories and into Alaska, the bears there are massive. They are hungry. And, there's lots of legends and stories of man-killer bears that just are angry and they will kill men and eat them. So this could be something like that, but this story does sound very strange. It was apparently featured in one of David Paulides' books, one of the Missing 411 books, just because the circumstances surrounding it are so odd and peculiar. Some of the strangest things are like the actual scene itself. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of any, fight. There wasn't any sign of disturbance in the soil, in the ground, or anything like that. And during the initial search, nothing was even found. The RCMP didn't really find anything, but Bart's friends, they weren't happy with that conclusion, so they went out, and his buddy found, his balaclava and, some human remains, parts of his head. That is very strange. The other strange thing is that his food was still left there. You know, bears are extremely sensitive to smell. For sure they would have eaten that food. It appeared that Bart was only there for maybe a day or two. Just based on how much supplies were left in his camp. The tent was pushed over or had collapsed for some unknown reason. It's really hard to say what that was. Maybe, you know, a creature, a Bigfoot-like creature came up to his tent and, you know, attacked him or did something to cause Bart maybe to get in his boat and paddle down the shore. It's a theory, but it's also very possible that Bart was at his campsite and he saw something down the shore that looked maybe like an animal, like a moose or something along those lines, and he went to go investigate, and he had his bow with him, and that was that. You know, he parked his boat, he got off into an area to have a rest and to, you know, I guess just wait for something to come along and perhaps shoot it, but, you know, that didn't happen. Something else happened, and Bart was killed from some sort of unknown force, you know. The thing that I find really strange, though, is he left his bear spray and, like, his radio at the camp. That doesn't make any sense. It's almost like he grabbed his bow and some arrows and whatever he had next to him at the time and took off, you know. He had some stuff with him, but some very key important items that he should have had on his person were not there, you know. And you're alone in the Yukon. Like, the Yukon is so wild and rugged and there's animals and danger everywhere. You would think that you would have those things close by at all times, especially if you leave your camp. But that's not the case with this story, so it just adds to the mystery. The Yukon, you know, there's lots of Bigfoot reports that come from the Yukon. There's lots of Sasquatch activity in that area. It's northern Canada, forest everywhere. And also the Yukon neighbors the Northwest Territories, which is where we have the Nahanni Valley, the Nahanni River, and, you know, the cases of the Headless Valley. So you have lots of old reports that we've talked about on this channel before of people going out into the wilderness back in the day, old prospectors and people out looking to find fortune, you know, looking for gold. Well, you know how the stories go. People end up finding heads that have washed up on the river shore. And they don't know how these people had died and why just the heads are found. Well, legend has it, there's the cannibal giants of the Nahanni Valley. There's Sasquatch-like beings, giants, you know. And people think that they are responsible. The First Nations people of the area think that they are responsible. So as soon as I heard the story, I immediately thought of, you know, the Nahanni Valley and these stories of the cannibal giants and them attacking people and, you know, taking their heads, basically. It's just a very, very strange story. That being said, though, like, you don't hear of the Friend or the RCMP or anybody finding any actual Bigfoot evidence. Like, they don't mention anything of tracks or anything like that. And, you know, you wonder, like, would they actually, even if they did find it? Probably not. But there are, in fact, a lot of reports that come out of the Yukon. And for example, we're going to go over one right now. We're going to go over a Bigfoot report that happened back in the early 90s. And it's a very strange one. It starts off normal enough, but by the end of it, when the person telling the story describes what the creature actually looked like, it has a really weird mystical vibe to it, you know, like the creature was there, but maybe not completely. And you'll know what I mean when you hear the story, so let's get into that right now. This incident happened in the summer of 1992 in my hometown of Whitehorse, Yukon, while I was taking a walk with my mother in the woods near her home. At the time, I guess I was about 39 years old and her about 60. This is the first time I've told this story to the public. What prompted me to tell the story is that I see very few Sasquatch stories from the Yukon. Actually, from what I've seen and heard, the Yukon should be considered a hotspot for Sasquatch, or the Bushman as it is known up here. I'm going to tell the story the way it comes out, and here it is. Being a sort of explorer kind of a person, I like to take walks in the woods and off the beaten track, so I have a better chance of finding something rare or interesting. For one, I'm a serious rock hound, and another, I'm a major local history buff, so I'm always off in the woods looking for something. Anyways, one evening I decided to walk down this old road heading west into some pretty dense and very rocky forest. It was a cat road, and it was skinny, and there were tall trees on each side. And the funny thing was, it kept twisting and turning back and forth that at any given time, either forward or backwards, the line of sight was only about maybe 80 feet, I figure. Anyways, I walk and sort of hope to get somewhere. A clearing, an old cabin, or at least a change of terrain, but no such luck. I noticed it was getting close to dark, so I figured I'd better turn around and head back, which was probably about an hour and a half walk. I got back to my mom's just as darkness fell. Just for the record, during the whole time, I didn't get any weird or scared feelings or anticipate anything going to happen. Nor did anything, which in retrospect has an interesting dimension. Point being is, it was extremely silent, almost too silent, and the next morning I tell my mom about the road, and the fact that not far down, there's an old dump where we might find some old bottles. Did she want to go check it out? Sure, she says. It was a beautiful sunny day, not a cloud in the sky, and it was about 20 degrees, a perfect day for a walk, so we went. We get to the dump, which was a very short distance down the road. She checks it out but finds all the bottles broken. She's fine though and enjoying herself, and she's picking flowers. I ask her if she wants to continue down the road a while. She says, "Okay, are you sure there's no bears around?" I said, "I don't think so. I never heard or seen anything last night, and besides, I've been in these woods all my life and I've never had any bear problems. I've seen a few, but they always just took off, and they were all rather small black bears." Anyways, we continued down the road, but just because Mom made me aware of bears, I sort of walked in front of her, about 50 feet or so, and I looked around each corner of the bend in the road, sort of bird-dogging the scene. I guess at about the 4th or 5th bend, I did see something on the rise to the left, about 80 feet away, standing and moving slightly from side to side. I stopped in my tracks, and my mom stops in hers, about 50 feet back and out of view. I turn to her and say, "Someone is up ahead." I look again, and there he is. I expect him to approach and say hi or whatever, but it doesn't happen. I look closer. The sun is behind him, and he is in the shade of the trees. I notice that this guy, besides being unusually big and tall, is also wearing black coveralls, and he has a huge mop of hair tapering from the top of his head to the outside of his shoulders. Now I'm standing in the middle of the road, my bright purple t-shirt is glowing almost neon bright in the sunshine. I'm waiting for him to approach, and I'm staring at him trying to see his face, his eyes, and there's nothing. He's still swaying from side to side a bit, but otherwise just standing there. My mom is still about 50 feet back, and she is staying there. She doesn't want to approach any further. She's saying, What is it, Bill?" I say, "I'm not sure." It's now about 2 minutes into this scene, and I'm now starting to feel weird. I'm staring at him, and he is at me, but I can't really see his face. He's in the bloody shadows of the trees. Finally, after I figure about 3 minutes of this stare down, I start to face reality, but I don't want to. That's the only way I can explain my feelings. As soon as I realized what I was having this stare down with, I got pretty excited. The first thing that came to my mind was that I didn't want my mom to see it, or it her. I wanted to defuse the situation with no screaming, no jumping, no fainting, no running. I was thinking of approaching it, but something told me not to, and anyways, it started to approach me. In a split second, I turned on my heel and told my mom, "Let's go." I still never told her what I saw, and I didn't have to. By looking at me, she knew. We walked at a quick pace, but I refused to run. I looked back at every corner, and at about the 3rd corner, there he was, about 20 feet behind. As soon as I saw him, he was gone in the woods, absolutely silent, not a sound, and he was huge. 2 silent strides, and he was gone. This final close encounter lasted, I figure, about 1 second at most. So fast that your mind doesn't even want to remember. But I did, and one thing for sure is that I was relieved that he was gone and going in another direction. After that, we finally came out to the main road. We went across and sat on a log in the woods on the other side. We took out a sandwich, and that's when I said, "Do you know what I saw?" She says, "No." I say, "A Sasquatch. I saw a Sasquatch." She says, "Are you sure?" I say, "Yes, ma'am. I remember some people talking about it. Apparently it visits the village all the time at night and rummages around in the yards." We went home and I drew a picture of it and ran it through my mind over and over again to try and keep it in my memory. That was 14 years ago and I can still remember it very well. Like I said, it was extremely quiet. I don't recall hearing birds or squirrels or anything like that. When we walked, it seemed that he was levitating or something, like he wasn't touching the ground, but a few inches above. He also seemed to have no definition outside of a silhouette, just like a shadow. I don't know if he had hair or fur, as I didn't bother to go up and touch him. The really weird thing of it is his pointy head configuration. It was very pronounced. When I was watching him, I thought of Saturday Night Live's Coneheads, but I surely wasn't laughing. Also, at the time of the incident, my adrenaline was the highest it has ever been my whole life. I was looking for a stick or a club, but couldn't find one, which angered me, and I was ready to take him on if need be, though I don't figure I had much of a chance. Like I said, other people have seen or heard him near the village, which is about 2 miles away. I figure I bumped into him on his way there. I've talked to a few native people, and our descriptions are uncannily similar. Now I believe in Bushman, and I think we should leave him and his kind at peace. Very interesting report. And like I said before I played that segment there, the creature is described as almost floating. Not really even touching the ground, and it just moves so quietly and stealthily, almost as if it was a ghost or something along those lines. Just a black silhouette. There are a lot of Sasquatch reports where you hear it described in that sense. And also another thing that matches up with lots of other reports is the description of the Bigfoot swaying back and forth. I don't know what that is or why it does that. Maybe it's trying to replicate a bush or something blowing in the breeze or something along those lines. Maybe it's something it's trying to mimic like that to try and keep itself concealed. Maybe you won't notice it if it acts like a bush. I have no idea. It's just one of those things that you will read about. The Sasquatch kind of going back and forth like that. Weird, but it's one of those things. You don't hear this guy say anything about the strange smell, but that's kind of one of those things that turns up sometimes and not in every report. Maybe about 50% of them you hear that strange, off-putting smell described. But a very interesting story nonetheless. Happened in the Yukon, and I'm sure there's thousands of other examples of encounters like this that have happened that were never documented, especially over the course of the centuries that have gone by, since people have been up there. All the stories of the cannibal giants and the Sasquatch in the Nahanni River Valley in the Northwest Territories, those stories are hundreds and hundreds of years old. That kind of stuff has been going on since man has been there, essentially, which is interesting. When you think of Alaska, Northwest Territories, the Yukon, if a creature did cross the Bering Land Bridge way back in the day, those would have been the first lands that it populated, along with people. So just an interesting thing to think about. There's lots of evidence of early human existence up there, lots of petroglyphs and caves and writings on the stone and stuff like that. There are lots of archaeological finds have been discovered in the Yukon. I think one of the most significant ones was the Bluefish Cave. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's what it was called. I think they found evidence of that cave being used as a shelter. I think they found actual remains of people. So lots of strange history up there. The north is just littered with mysteries. So when you hear a story about a guy like Bart Schleyer, an expert hunter, a scientist, a biologist, a very smart guy, a very talented guy, a guy that was well respected in his community, not just in his community, but among the scientific community and among the hunting community. And you feel like he would have been on top of anything if something was going on around him that didn't seem right. I'm sure he would have sensed something like that, especially if it was a bear, because bears were his specialty. That was his thing, was researching bears. He knew everything about bear behavior. He had so much experience tagging these things and putting collars on them and actual hands-on experience. What do you guys think? It just doesn't add up to me. It does seem like something a little bit creepier happened. Maybe the whole time he was there, which was a day or two, something was watching him. When you get dropped off by a float plane, that makes a lot of noise, so if there was something intelligent in the area, it would have been able to detect, his arrival, basically. It would have been able to hear the plane come in, and it would know, that's where I gotta go to find this guy. And the reason for, a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot doing something like that is a mystery. It's something we don't know, if it in fact was a Bigfoot. It's just one of those things, every now and then you hear like really gruesome, horrific stories like this, and they're very, very rare. But it's like, what is going on? Even like just, it's terrifying, if you go out in the woods by yourself, even just thinking of a bear coming into your camp and trying to get you while you're in your tent, that is just a nightmare to think about, But very weird how nothing in the camp was really bothered. Everything was left alone and it wasn't disturbed, which doesn't add up to a bear. Bears don't behave like that. They will go for the food and they will take all the food. That's just what they do. So anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments section. If you haven't subscribed to Mountain Beast Mysteries, hit the subscribe button. If you don't have the notifications turn on the notifications. I appreciate you guys watching this video. We'll see you next time on Mountain Beast Mysteries. Today's adventure started off like any other. You packed up all of your ski equipment, you checked the weather, you checked the snow conditions on the mountain, and you called your buddies to let them know you're on your way out to the mountain for one last day of ski touring to cap off what was a great winter. You get to the mountain after a beautiful and peaceful drive through the wilderness and you find your friends at the meetup location. Everyone is in high spirits and everyone is pumped to ditch the cars and get out into the Alpine. In town, you're a local legend. You worked through the winters as a member of the ski patrol at the local hill. You've conducted mountaineering expeditions all over the Himalayas. You have a vast knowledge of alpine climbing and ski touring, and people always come to you when they want to have a good time in the mountains. They see you as a very talented guide and just a great person to be around. They trust you with their lives. After getting all geared up, you and the 20 or so others in your group hit the trail and begin making your way up the mountain. This isn't just any other mountain though. This is Mount St. Helens, a mountain shrouded in mystery and legends that sound too fantastic to be true. You've heard the rumors floating around town of the ape men or the mountain devils that are said to roam the areas surrounding Mount St. Helens. But for the most part, you chalk it up to be nothing more than that, a rumor. There's no way anything like that could actually exist, you think to yourself. And let's be honest, you've been out to this very spot countless times, and you've never seen or heard anything out there in the wilderness to lead you to believe that these ape men, or Bigfoot creatures as they're most commonly known, actually exist, let alone be credited with the violent attack of a group of prospectors back in the 1920s. You put all these thoughts in the back of your mind and focus on the rest of the climb and spending time with your friends. The day is young and there's still so much adventure yet to come. You and your buddies make it to the top of the snow-covered peak. It's late spring and this is the only part of the mountain that still has snow. Talk about late season. You get the great idea to put your new 35mm camera to the test by recommending to your friends that you should ski down first and then set up the camera to get some good action shots of everybody else skiing down. What a better way to make memories than to literally freeze them in time and put them in an album to cherish well into the future. Everyone is excited about the idea and they send you on your way. What you don't realize though, is that this is literally the last time you would see any of your friends, or anyone else for that matter. This is the day that you disappear forever. Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the strange disappearance of Jim Carter. Jim Carter disappeared back in 1950 in the month of May. He was a professional skier, professional alpinist. He was really well known, had an incredible skill set in the mountains. He was well trained, he knew what he was doing, and for some reason, in late May of that year, he went missing while on a ski trip with like 20 other people. Very peculiar circumstances too that he went missing under. He just vanished after a massive 2-week search, sometimes involving up to 75 people. So the question is, how did Jim disappear? Now, the interesting thing is that Jim went missing in what is called Ape Canyon. And we know about Ape Canyon here in the Bigfoot world because it's the site of the famous Ape Canyon incident, where a bunch of prospectors were attacked in their cabin by multiple rock-throwing Bigfoot creatures. And they just barely made it through the night and then got out of there in a hurry. It's one of the most famous Bigfoot stories out there. Is it related to this story, the story of Jim Carter and his bizarre disappearance? Possibly. We have lots of Bigfoot stories that come out of the Mount St. Helens region, just like we talked about in the last video. But before I share my thoughts on this story, let's get into what actually happened. I'll go over an article here that was first published back in 1963. The Longview, Washington Times, August 1963. Ape Canyon, the legendary home of the hairy apes of Mount St. Helens, apparently swallowed an experienced mountaineer and expert skier in May of 1950. No trace of Jim Carter, 32, who disappeared from a 20-member climbing party from Seattle was found, although teams of the Northwest's most proficient mountain rescue units combed the area for weeks. Carter's complete disappearance is an unsolved mystery to this day, declared Bob Lee, a well-known Portland mountaineer who is a member of the exclusive Worldwide Alpine Club, a leader of the 1961 Himalayan expedition, and advisor to the 1963 American expedition. Lee said he had never seen one of the monsters, but that there certainly was evidence that there was something strange on the high slopes of the mountain. He said he was convinced of this during the search for Carter. Dr. Otto Trott, Lee Stark, and myself finally came to the conclusion that the Mountain Devils got him, said Lee seriously. Lee, a member of the Seattle Mountain Search and Rescue Unit at the time, describes the hunt for Carter in Ape Canyon as the most eerie experience I have ever had. He said that every time he got cut off from the rest of the searchers during the long hunt, he got a feeling that somebody was watching him. I could feel the hair on my neck standing up. It was eerie. I was unarmed except for my ice axe, and believe me, I never let go of that. At this point in Lee's story, I could feel my own hair standing up a bit. Ready to shoulder packs for a safari to Ape Canyon to try and determine whether there is any truth to the ape stories, I began to feel a little dubious about the whole expedition. The rest of Lee's tales about the Seattle man's disappearance didn't do much to reassure me. It seemed that the missing man Carter had climbed Mount St. Helens with a group from Seattle on a warm, clear Sunday. On the way down the mountain, he left the other climbers near a landmark called Dog's Head at the 8,000-foot level. Carter told them he would ski around to the left and take a picture of the group as they skied down to the timberline. That was the last time that anyone had seen Carter. The next morning, searchers found a discarded film box at the point where he had taken a picture. From there, Carter eventually took off down the mountain in a wild, death-defying dash, taking chances that no skier of his caliber would take unless something was terribly wrong or he was being pursued, says Lee, who was one of the first searchers to reach Carter's ski tracks. He jumped over 2 or 3 large crevasses and evidently was going like the devil. When Carter's tracks reached the precipitous sides of Ape Canyon, the searchers were amazed to see that Carter had been in such a hurry that he went right down the steep canyon walls. But they didn't find him at the bottom of the canyon as they expected. We combed the canyon, one end to the other, for 5 days. Sometimes there were as many as 75 persons in the search party, but no sign of Carter or his equipment was found, Lee says. After 2 weeks, the search was called off. Lee, who has lived in the Northwest most of his life, recalls that there are about 25 different reports of people being attacked by ape-like men in the Mount St. Helens and Cascade areas over a 20-year period. One was a group of Boy Scouts from Centralia, he said. As near as he could remember, several of the boys who were taken off the mountain were hysterical after being attacked by the Mountain Devils. Director Dick Whitney of the Regional Boy Scout Office of Olympia, Washington, promised to look for a record of the incident. To our surprise, he called back to say that he had located the name of the leader of the troop involved in the incident. It was a troop under the late Scoutmaster Pease from Centralia, he said. Whitney promised to have Pease's son, who worked for the state of Washington, call the Journal as soon as he returns from vacation. a very strange story. This guy had lots of experience in the outdoors, in the alpine, and on skis. Like, he knew it, his friends knew it. They didn't think there was anything really to worry about. And it's interesting to hear what the search and rescue people say, you know, that they were extremely creeped out and always had that feeling that they were being watched while they were searching for him. It's weird. He essentially fell right into Ape Canyon, you know, right there where this crazy event happened back in 1924, one of the most famous Bigfoot stories out there, one of the few Bigfoot stories where these creatures have been documented, you know, attacking people and actually having a crazy altercation where the people are shooting at them. You know, is it a coincidence that this guy went missing right where that happened? This guy was frantically trying to get down the mountain and there was no sign of avalanches, you know? And his friends that were looking for him, they couldn't find any signs of anything really strange happening other than that it appeared that he was trying to get away from something, you know? The weird thing is, though, is that no Bigfoot-like tracks were spotted. When you're up there on a mountain like that and the wind is blowing, it doesn't take long for tracks to get covered up. So there could have been tracks there. Maybe they just didn't see them. But they followed his ski tracks. They saw that he had skied over like a big crevasse. And, you know, that's a very, like, that's kind of a daredevil move, you know, very, very dangerous, very high risk, and eventually skied apparently off into the canyon. To never be found again. And there was a lot of effort put into trying to find him. There was a lot of people involved. And it's just weird, you know, that he vanished in that way, because you would think that all they would have to do is follow the tracks and that would lead them to his body, but it didn't. You're kind of like pinpointing exactly where he should be, and he should be there, and he's not. He's just gone, and the body has never been found. And that happened, you know, over 70 years ago. So it's likely, obviously, now that his remains probably won't ever be found. It's not impossible, but highly, highly unlikely. And, you know, if the Ape Canyon story is true, then there are some sort of violent ape-like beings out there. And, you know, after an incident like that where, you know, these prospectors shot at them and they had this little battle throughout the night, after an incident like that, you would think that they might be angry. And back in 1950, this was only 26 years after that. You know, it's not 70 years like nowadays. It was a little more fresh in people's memories, a little more fresh in the history of Bigfoot. It's just a very, very strange story. It's one of the stories where you think, really, like, this guy should have been found. You know, the way they searched the area and just the amount of skill that these people had. They were highly trained search and rescue people, and they couldn't find him. And there was like 75 people looking for him at one point. So eventually they just called off the search. They did find, you know, the little box from the roll of film that he had put in his camera, and that's about it. You know, it would be really interesting if that camera was found, you know, and maybe the film was in it still, and maybe it was preserved, and some images were recorded on it. Mysterious images, maybe images of Bigfoot. Who knows? It kind of reminds me of the Dyatlov Pass incident. It's a story about a group of skiers who took off into the mountains for, you know, however many days, and they all died. And nobody really knows how, but they had cameras with them. They were documenting their trip. And some of the photos are very mysterious. But, you know, the story hasn't really been solved yet. The case hasn't been solved. They don't know what exactly happened. A lot of people like to think it was like a Yeti creature. A lot of people like to think it was military experiments, things of that nature, but there hasn't been any definitive conclusion as to what happened with the Dyatlov Pass incident. And the same with this story. We'll probably never find out, and it'll be a mystery forever. Anyways, let me know what you guys think of this mystery down in the comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Mountain Beast Mysteries. Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. In today's video, I wanted to talk about a case that has potential to be, you know, a missing 411 case. A case maybe potentially involving Bigfoot. Recently, I was talking to my friend Ken Walker, and if you don't know who Ken Walker is, he's the world champion taxidermist who is in some of my Expedition Sasquatch videos. He's the guy who created a replica Patty from the Patterson-Gimlin film. And you can see in some of the shots here, he did a pretty decent job of recreating that. Ken is, a Sasquatch enthusiast. He is probably one of the most knowledgeable guys in my neck of the woods on the topic. So he knows a lot of stories and a lot of anecdotes, and this is something that he brought to my attention. So back, I think it was in the late 90s, a guy named Michel Trudeau, who is Justin Trudeau's brother, and Justin Trudeau is obviously the Prime Minister of Canada. This guy, Michel Trudeau, was skiing in British Columbia at a place called Kokanee Lake. And I guess there was an avalanche of some sort, and it swept them into the water, and Michel Trudeau was in the lake, and he wasn't able to get out, and he drowned and died. And that's the story. But Ken was saying that he thinks there's potential for this to be like a Bigfoot-related missing 411 case, because they weren't able to recover this guy's body. Now, if you look at pictures of Kokanee Lake, it is not a very big lake at all, and on a nice day, the water is crystal clear. Like, it's a crystal clear glacial lake. You can see right to the bottom of it, pretty much from anywhere in the lake, when the water's calm. There's a news segment that kind of came out about it on CBC, and I'll let you guys just watch it right now so you can get a little idea of what they're saying happened.
Michel Trudeau was an experienced outdoorsman who loved and respected nature, but nature got the better of him. The youngest son of the former Prime Minister was on a skiing trip in Kokanee Glacier Park near Nelson, British Columbia, when an avalanche swept him off the mountain and into Kokanee Lake. With more on the tragedy, here's the CBC's Kelly Crow.
Getting icing reports or?
Local pilots spent the day checking the weather report and watching the skies. So far, low clouds have kept anyone from getting into the area where 23-year-old Michel Trudeau drowned on Friday, swept into a glacial lake by an early winter avalanche, while 3 of his friends watched helplessly from shore.
They were making their way down the trail with touring-style skis. So it was, if you can imagine, they were in the water with backpacks, winter gear, and skis. And from this, we learned that he was unable to get himself to the shore, struggling with his gear.
Born into fame as the youngest son of then Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau and his wife Margaret, Michel Trudeau grew up out of the spotlight, learning to live and love adventure in Canada's western mountain ranges. Just last month, he was featured on a CBC special talking about his mother.
The scary wide world sometimes catches her unawares because it's sometimes so incomprehensible that people can't be as kind and as gentle as she is.
Local experts say the skiers were well prepared for their 3-day trip in the Kokanee Glacier Provincial Park. They carried avalanche equipment and even tested the slopes for stability before setting out for home on Friday. But the sudden heavy wet snowfall made an already avalanche-prone area even more dangerous.
Wet snow, when it's moving, has a tremendous amount of energy. It's almost like concrete coming out of the back of a concrete truck where it just wants to flow.
Nelson RCMP Constable Randy Cook says he talked briefly to Michel's father.
He's deeply shaken by this. He was very, very quiet, and but asked us to go on and to do what we had to do to recover the body and to keep him informed.
A spokesman for the Trudeau family released this statement saying, Michel's parents are deeply saddened by the report of his death. They appreciate the many expressions of sympathy they have received and ask that the family be given privacy. So the grim wait continues here for the first chance to get up in the mountains and begin the search. But police are not optimistic that this low cloud cover will lift even by morning. And before the divers can begin, avalanche experts still have to fly over the area and drop explosives to loosen the still dangerous snow. Kelly Crow, CBC News, Nelson, British Columbia.
Now this guy, like Michel Trudeau, is Justin Trudeau's brother and Pierre Trudeau's son. So he's already quite famous because Pierre Trudeau was also, Prime Minister of Canada at one point. So this is someone where like, you would think they would do whatever they could to get this guy's body. Whether it being waiting for the weather to clear up, you know, you'd think they would go in with the divers and get the body. Even if they had to wait till the summertime, on a nice day, the body would still be there. And you would think, you know, nowadays even, there'd be bones or something, some sort of remains at the bottom of that lake that you would be able to see. If you took a canoe out onto that lake in the summer on a nice clear day, when the water's calm, you'd be able to see everything. So why are they saying that this guy's body was not found and not recovered? Well, Ken suspects that something else may have happened. It could have been a missing 411 case. The guy could have just vanished and disappeared under strange circumstances. You know, potentially, you know, Bigfoot running off with him or whatever, you know. This is in British Columbia. This is Sasquatch territory. I'm sure there's lots of Bigfoot reports in that general area. You're up in the mountains and there's, you know, remote wilderness all around you. So it does have potential to be a Bigfoot-related missing 411 case, and I don't see why divers, high-altitude divers, wouldn't be able to recover the remains of this guy. Even to this day, there has to be something there that you could see. It's a small lake, small crystal clear lake. And there are high-altitude divers and cold-water divers, you know. They should be able to go in there and search the bottom of the lake and find this guy's remains. I mean, I don't see why they wouldn't be able to do it even in like the spring or summertime, you know. If you look at the pictures of this lake, you know, you think to yourself, what is stopping these people from going in there and finding this guy? Well, I think it's possible that he might not even be in the lake. He might have been taken or vanished somehow, you know. So there's probably something going on there that they're not talking about, and the official story is he was caught up in an avalanche and, you know, swept into the water and drowned because he had all his ski gear on. That's at least what they're saying in the story. But none of his friends were missing or dead. You know, I wonder what they have to say about it, about what happened. Back probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I think about 6 years ago, there was a guy from Red Deer, Alberta. He worked at a rec center, like a you know, recreation fitness facility in Red Deer, and he went swimming in a lake in Jasper National Park. And a person I knew closely at the time was friends with him, was really good friends with him, and he went swimming in this lake in Jasper, and he just vanished. He just disappeared, and there was a friend with him that was at the shore of this lake, and he didn't even know what happened to him. They think he drowned, but they couldn't find this guy's body, like, at all. They had divers there, and they couldn't find him. It's just like he just went for a swim and completely just disappeared. So weird stuff like that does happen, and it happens more often than you think. So I don't think it's completely out of the question to speculate that something more than an avalanche happened to Michel Trudeau. I mean, it is purely speculation, right? Like, this is just a theory of Ken's, and he kind of made some good points to make me think that, yeah, like, why wouldn't they be able to get his body at least at some point, you know, after this all happened? Like, I can't think of anything that would be stopping them from, like, scouring the bottom of that small lake, that crystal clear lake, and recovering whatever they could. This isn't just some guy either. This is the son of a prime minister, the brother of a future prime minister. This is someone born into fame, somebody whose family has, you know, resources. And they just, you know, left him there and said, oh, you know, there's an avalanche. We can't get to his body because of bad weather. We'll just leave him. Like, I don't think so. I think anybody, if they had the resources, would do whatever they could to, you know, get their family member. And it just didn't happen. At least that's what they're saying. Like, Ken's theory and what I'm thinking now is that, you know, something else happened. Something took this guy, and they were forced to come up with a story, you know, as to why he vanished. And I guess it could be something else Like, it doesn't have to be a missing 401 Bigfoot case. It could have been something completely different. Like, maybe he was murdered or abducted by aliens or something crazy, but it just doesn't add up, you know? So it is kind of interesting to think about. Anyways, like I said, purely speculation. This is just a theory. This is like, you know, it might not even be true at all. It could have just been an avalanche and there's something I'm missing. So anyways, think of it what you will. I want to know what you guys think about this. Like, look at these photos of the lake and just think to yourself, would they really not be able to recover this guy's body? You know? That's all I have for today's video. If you want to support Mountain Beast Mysteries, you can do so using the GoFundMe link in the video description. I really appreciate you guys watching these videos. We'll see you next time on Mountain Beast Mysteries. Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. Have you guys ever heard of Port Chatham, Alaska? Recently a subscriber reached out to me in an email and asked if I've ever looked into the Bigfoot encounters and lore of Port Chatham, Alaska. And I've also recently seen a lot of posts about it online, like on Facebook and you know, on all the social media platforms, and I'm pretty sure I've actually seen Port Chatham featured on a network TV show, but to be honest, I haven't really looked into it at all. It doesn't, however, take a lot of digging to see that Port Chatham, Alaska is shrouded in mystery and horror. And there's plenty of missing person stories, as well as stories of body parts washing up on the shores, and of course you have plenty of standard visual Bigfoot encounters and reports to go along with it. When there's a location that has all these horrific stories of people going missing and vanishing, like into thin air, as well as countless reports of Sasquatch, it's really easy to put two and two together. Now, Port Chatham is a bay on the southern coast of Alaska, not too far south, kind of southwest of Anchorage. But the bay town in Port Chatham is called Port Lock. And this town was once a thriving fishing community that was home to a cannery. Essentially, the business of the entire settlement was fishing and canning said fish. And with this being said, it's worth noting that Port Lock had an official population of only 31. You know, so when I say thriving fishing community, I mean it's more of like just a little village. And that was, you know, the way they made their living. You know, it's safe to assume that everyone that lived there knew each other. And there wasn't really any strangers. And when there was strangers, you know, everyone knew about it. But I guess as the story goes, there were so many crazy Bigfoot sightings and also mysterious disappearances that occurred that by 1950, 1951, the whole town just packed up and left. Or I should say the whole village of 31 people packed up and left. Very weird, very creepy. You know, this really reminds me of a place here in Alberta near Nordegg. There's an abandoned ghost town called Mountain Park. And if you're familiar with the Rocky Mountains here in Alberta and the Nordegg area and, you know, the mining town of Chatham, you've probably heard of or driven through this mountain park area. And it's a place where back in the 50s, everyone up and left. And it didn't have to do with Bigfoot. It was, you know, economical reasons why everyone packed up and left. It had to do with the mining in the area. But everyone up and left and the whole town was abandoned. And actually they dismantled the whole town, leaving nothing but the foundations. And I made a video about that recently because there was actually a Bigfoot encounter, a very crazy Bigfoot encounter that happened there, where these, you know, townspeople actually caught one of these Bigfoot creatures inside a barn, and rumor has it that they killed it and buried it somewhere out in those hills. So that is an old town as well that was abandoned back, you know, in the early 50s. It's just something that happened, you know, when nothing was going on in a town, people would just leave. They, you know, they would follow the money. Wherever they can make a living, you know, that's where they went. So I don't know what the truth is behind this Port Chatham area, but I do know, like, it is well known if you go online, if you do some research, that a lot of crazy weird things happened in Port Chatham. People going missing, dismembered bodies showing up, floating up on shore of like lakes, and it's very reminiscent actually of the encounters in the Nahanni Valley in the Northwest Territories. I've made multiple videos about that, where headless bodies would, float up along shore of the river, and the rumor was that these, cannibal giants were doing it. People were going missing. Now it is worth noting that back in the day, in these areas, in these remote wilderness areas, things were a lot different. It was kind of like the Wild West, You could get away with things a lot easier than you could nowadays. And like I said, these are small towns, small communities. If you didn't like someone, it wouldn't take a lot of effort to get rid of them and to get away with it. So I'm sure a lot of these old ghost towns had lots of tales of, people disappearing, people getting murdered, and, the reasons to people getting murdered is whatever. People have their reasons for doing that. But back in the day, it was like the Wild West. And to get away with something like that was a lot easier. People back in those days were also more desperate than they are now. It was harder to make a living, and they lived a hard life, and they lived in a really remote area. So, I'm sure quarrels and arguments and disputes happened quite often. I'm not saying that this is the reason why this town packed up and left and why so many people were disappearing, but it happened. And, it kind of makes me wonder, when I say so many people disappeared out of a village of only 31, I wonder what the actual numbers are on that. How many people actually vanished. But you do hear lots of reports, too, of actual Bigfoot creatures being seen and described, that fit the description of Bigfoot. So when you take those encounters and take the stories of people missing with, dismembered limbs, it is really easy to make it up in your mind that Bigfoot is responsible for all of this weirdness. But anyways, I'm going to dig a lot deeper into this Port Chatham stuff to see what the actual facts are and to find some specific tales from that area to share with you guys. I have to say I'm kind of skeptical. Just because I kind of just started looking into it, and there is a lot of lore and stories out there, but there's no real proof that any of it is true. The only thing that you can find out for sure is that people did go missing and people died, but as to what actually killed them, it's still up in the air. But I'm gonna do my best to find some actual information for you guys and some facts. So with that being said, I do have a couple stories here to share with you guys from Alaska. They're not from this Port Chatham area, but they're interesting nonetheless. So without further ado, hope you guys enjoy these Sasquatch tales from Alaska. Fall of 1992. A friend and I were driving back to Fairbanks from Anchorage. I was driving her truck, a 1980 Dodge D50. These trucks sit very low to the ground. It was late at night and we were just about to the tourist area of the Denali Park. It wasn't winter yet. Just before a corner, my lights hit something sitting on the yellow line in the middle of the road. The lights to this truck were grossly out of adjustment, so they were pointing right at the thing. It was sitting in the middle of the road with its legs pulled up to its chest and its arms folded over its knees. Its head was between its arms looking down to the ground. It had long human-like hair. At first I thought it was an orangutan. Then I thought to myself, what would an orangutan be doing in the middle of nowhere in Alaska? I've lived here almost all my life and there is no animal like this one. I thought to myself, the only way that could have been an orangutan is if there's a circus out here. I knew that was not a possibility in such a remote area. I drove right next to it and I was at its level. If I had been going slow, I could have touched it easily. I was freaked out and thought I must be seeing things. Maybe I was tired. My friend saw it too, though, although neither one of us said a word until we reached the gas station in the town of Healy just past Denali. She said, "Did you see that?" And I said, "I thought I was seeing things." This spooked us so bad, we didn't even say anything to each other about it until we were around people. We've talked about this and still agree that we saw this thing. We both have decided not to bring it up because no one believes it anyway. Why I feel this is so unusual is there's no animal native to Alaska that could resemble this thing in any way. We have bears, moose, caribou, porcupine, rabbits, but none of these animals have knees or long reddish colored hair. I don't know how to explain it, and I've given up trying to because nobody believes it. They think you're joking. I don't want to be harassed by any nuts. I just want to share my genuine incident in case others have seen it. February 2004. This incident happened last night just after 11 p.m. My daughter was home alone. She lives with a relative who was out of town. She called me at 11:22 p.m. She was terrified. She said she could hear something walking back and forth by her bedroom window. She also said she looked out the window when she first heard it and saw something big and black and really big. She described the thing to have been about 3 to 4 feet above the bottom of the window. When I went down to look behind the house this morning, I stood by the window. I'm 5'4" and my eyes just reached the bottom of the window, so I figure this thing must have been 7 to 8 feet tall. We live in a small village of less than 500. There are a lot of bushes and trees in between the houses. Their house is close to the beach, and there's forests surrounding the town. Now, I've never known my daughter to be afraid of anything, but last night when I went to pick her up, she was shaking like a leaf. She was hysterical. It took me almost an hour to calm her down. I questioned her about what happened. She called me about 5 minutes after she first saw it. She was too scared to move. When I got down there, I would not look behind the house, but she was hiding in my relative's closet. She said it was walking back and forth right behind the house. She described the footsteps as sounding like something very large walking on 2 feet, kind of like stomping. My daughter is very down to earth, not one prone to dramatics. When I first went down there, I didn't really know what was going on, just that my daughter was scared spitless. But I would not look behind the house. When I went up to the house, my hair felt like it was standing on end, and I had goosebumps really bad. I was scared and didn't know why. I questioned a friend who lives next door to my daughter. She said she heard something but wasn't too sure what it was, but she didn't check it out. She also heard her dog barking. There are quite a few other stories about sightings close to town. One was less than a mile away, but there have also been sightings on the Heidelberg Road by several people, too many to post. Every year, hundreds of people from all walks of life go missing in the remote wilderness areas of North America. What was supposed to be nothing more than a relaxing and recharging getaway to the mountains has, for some people, turned into nothing less than a nightmare. The strange thing about these disappearances is their extremely mysterious nature. For many cases, the individual that disappears is someone who's experienced in outdoor recreation. They know what they're doing. They're usually prepared. It's unlike them to put themselves in situations where something could go terribly wrong. Yes, there's only so much one can do to prepare for a life and death situation in the wilderness, a potential survival situation. However, a lot of these incidents happen on well-used trails. A person was seen one second and seemingly gone the next. Sometimes the person's backpack will be found and in perfect condition, containing all of their packed belongings that you would think to be essential for the outdoors. It's as if they just placed their pack on the ground and walked off. Sometimes items of clothing will be found in perplexing locations. Perhaps a jacket that would be needed to help keep warm, or a pair of boots that are without a doubt mandatory to have on your feet while traveling through rough mountain terrain. Tales of strange disappearances are all over the web. Just have a look for yourself. It happens every single year. People do get lost due to inexperience in the wilderness. There's cases where people get kidnapped and are never seen from again. There's explanations for a number of these disappearances. but there's a large amount of genuinely mysterious and unexplained disappearances that are extremely difficult to piece together and make any sense of. To many, the answers to these cases reside in the world of the supernatural. Something paranormal is responsible. Something otherworldly. Hey everyone, welcome to Mountain Beast Mysteries. On July 19th, 1991, a 12-year-old boy named Jared Negretti disappeared in San Bernardino National Forest. He was part of a scout group who were trying to summit Mount San Gorgonio, which is a peak of about 11,500 feet. Along the way to the top, Jared was kind of left behind. He was struggling physically to keep up with the group. And they didn't really notice until they got near the peak. Now, there was another group of hikers on the trail who crossed paths with Jared on their way up. And when they got to the group of scouts at the top of the mountain, they told the scout leader, they said, look, this kid, we came across him, and he was cutting switchbacks on the way down. He was struggling. And supposedly, the scout leader said, oh, okay, we'll get him on the way back down, we'll meet up with him, and everything will be fine. But for some reason, they thought it was okay. I guess maybe the attitude at the time was that everything was fine. It was a nice day. The weather wasn't crazy. Everything seemed normal. Everyone was happy. I'm sure the rest of the scouts were happy to get to the top of the mountain. But Jared was never seen again. They went back down to find him and he was gone. The last time he was seen was at 6 p.m. as he was cutting through these switchbacks. Now, when you cut switchbacks, it's a very dangerous thing to do because the trail's zigzagging up or down the mountain, left to right, to make the incline less steep. But eventually, if you're heading down the mountain, that zigzagging, that switchback is going to end, and the trail's going to go left or right. But if you don't know when the last zigzag is, when the last cutback is, you're going to go past the end of the trail, the end of the switchback. And then you're going to keep going down the mountain expecting to come up on the trail again, and it won't be there. And, you know, at that point, it's very easy to get lost. So that's more than likely what happened to Jared. Because at the bottom of that zigzag, that's where they found his backpack, which had beef jerky in it. There were candy wrappers. They found a camera that Jared had with him. Now, the very interesting thing about this is that there was a roll of film in the camera, and they were able to get it developed. There were 12 photos on it. And the last photo on that roll of film was this. This is the actual photo of Jared, the last picture of him ever taken. And it's kind of disturbing in my opinion. Just a picture of his eyes and nose. But the weird thing is, if you look on the right side of the photo, to me this looks like an eye, like the reflection of an eye. I don't know if that's what it actually is, if it's a trick of the light, of the camera flash, or something going on with the lens. I don't know if it's a double exposure, because this was a film camera. This is back in 1991. But it really does kind of look like an eye of something behind him, over his left shoulder. So what is going on here? What happened to Jared? There were, they say, as many as 3,000 people looking for him over the course of the search, putting in 45,000 hours of time, combing the area looking for this kid. And his body was never found. They did find footprints that apparently matched his shoes, but they couldn't ever find the body. It's been over 30 years and there hasn't been a sign of him. They had helicopters, they had infrared, you know, I'm sure they had dogs looking for him. And these dogs that work with search and rescue, they're trained to find people, they're trained to find bodies. I find it very unusual that when they put in that much effort, they can't find the body. They find the backpack, they find the food, you know, they find his camera. I think they found his canteen as well, but no body. You know, if you have dogs, you can use that backpack to, you know, tell them, like, that's the scent you have to go after, and they'll go after it. I don't know why they thought it was a good idea to just leave him behind. I guess if they didn't notice he was lagging behind, if they were racing to the top, which apparently they were, the kids were very excited, and they were going really fast. They were trying to get to the top, and you know, in the moment, they probably didn't know that he was far behind. For a 12-year-old, he was a pretty big kid. He was, you know, 150 pounds, supposedly. and he just couldn't do it. But they say his spirits were high that day before this all happened. He was in a good mood. He was excited to go hiking. He was excited to go to the top of the mountain. But things didn't turn out the way they should have. You'd think over the course of the years with that many people going through the area that he would have been found. But what happened to him? Did he get attacked by an animal? Did he get drug off by a mountain lion? There were no signs around any of his stuff that would indicate that. That would indicate some sort of struggle. Usually if there's an animal attack and the person's killed, there's a remnants of the body. The entire body doesn't just disappear. There's usually, bits of the person and items of clothing left scattered around. But there was nothing here other than the backpack with stuff in it and the camera. Now in that photo, they suspect that maybe he was using the camera flash to see in the dark, because you can see like it's very underexposed. Everything behind him is underexposed except his face where the flash hit. Maybe he was doing that. Maybe he was trying to get a picture of whatever this thing was behind him, if there is something actually there. I'm just saying it looks like there's something behind him. It looks very creepy to me. It looks like an eye. But what if it is something? What is it? What is it? If he's standing up, it's something that's, at least as tall as him. Sasquatch? Another person? Who knows? There's always a possibility of kidnapping or abduction by another human being. But there's also the possibility of kidnapping and abduction by Sasquatch beings. There's lots of stories and lore around that. You have the famous case of Albert Ostman, who was taken at night on the west coast of British Columbia while he was sleeping in his sleeping bag. A Sasquatch comes and picks him up. As he's in the sleeping bag, it picks up the whole sleeping bag and carries him off up the mountain. The story of Seraphine Long, an indigenous woman who was out foraging and picking firewood and whatnot. She was taken by a Sasquatch and supposedly held captive for a long, long time and was able to escape. Now, these are just stories right now. There's no real way of verifying that these are legitimate. People have tried, but at this point, they're still just anecdotes and tales contributing to the mystical lore of Sasquatch. These cases of missing people in the mountains and in the national parks are very bizarre. They've been documented and researched heavily by David Paulides of the Missing 411 series and documentaries. Highly recommend checking those out. He's put a lot of work in to these cases, into researching them. He's been actively trying to uncover the mystery. So go on Google, go on YouTube, look up David Paulides and Missing 411 and check out his work. He's got a YouTube channel. I'll post the link down below in the description. Obviously, if you're not that skilled in the outdoors, it's very easy for something to happen, to get lost and to find yourself off trail. Maybe you walk off the trail to go take a leak or something, go to the bathroom. It could be easy to get turned around, especially if you're a kid. These were scouts. They probably had a little bit of experience, but not much. The perplexing part, though, is the finding of the items and him completely vanishing. Now, the interesting thing is this San Bernardino National Forest, there's many cases of missing people. One of these other cases is of a boy named David Gonzalez. He was 9 years old, July 31st, 2004. He's at Hannah Flats Campground, I think it was called, in the San Bernardino National Forest. And he was with his mother, and the car that they had was about 150 feet away. And he said he wanted to go back to the car so we could get some cookies that were in there. And the mom said, okay, gave him the keys. He was 9 years old. He wasn't like a really little kid. If you remember being 9, I'm sure you had the capabilities of taking some car keys and walking back 100 feet to the car, getting your stuff, and then, heading back. But this mother apparently watched David walk towards the car, and then she turned for a split second. And then when she turned back to look at David, he was gone. The car was never unlocked. The cookies were still in the car. She had just took her attention away for a brief moment, and David was gone. A year later, they found his body a mile away at the bottom of a ravine. They don't know how he got there. Was he taken by a person? Was he kidnapped? It was at a campground, so there could have been other people around. There most likely was. But there could have been other things around too. Initially, they suspected a mountain lion took him and drug him off maybe, but on his body, like, there was no signs of that. There was no signs of an animal attack or anything like that. They don't know what happened. They don't know how he got a mile away and at the bottom of this ravine. But in this case, the body was discovered, but still, it's a mystery and it was never solved. You'd think at a campground, it'd be much easier than on, say, a hiking trail to make your way around. You know, a campground, there's usually dirt roads. You can see other campgrounds, you can see other people. It's really strange how in a split second he was there and then all of a sudden he was gone. And if you think of Sasquatch, you know, it means that these things might not be as nice as some people think they are. And they're in the forest waiting, in some cases, to take someone. And in a lot of these weird cases, it's usually a child. And sometimes it's a very elderly person. And also there's a lot of cases of people who have disabilities who go missing. There was just recently in British Columbia, I think it was on Vancouver Island, this past December, they found a body of a woman who, she had a cognitive disability of some kind, but it wasn't like that crazy. She was able to drive and everything and go do things on her own. And she was an avid hiker and, you know, lover of the outdoors. And she went hiking and she disappeared a year ago. They couldn't find her. They searched for a long time. They could not find her. And then all of a sudden, a year later, this past December, they find her body in the same area. It's like she wasn't there, and then a year later, they find her body. It's kind of weird. Like, there's lots of theories around that too. Like, do these people disappear into a portal and then they magically show up later? It's strange, especially, you know, if they do have dogs and thermal and infrared and whatnot. With all these tools at their disposal to find these people, they can't do it. And then magically, years later, 1 year later, however long it is, the body just turns up. I find that very unusual. But it just goes to show, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen. If you have kids and you're recreating in the outdoors, keep a very close eye on them. Because this stuff happens, like, this is real. They don't know what's going on in a lot of these cases. They don't know, you know, if it's a natural thing, if people are just getting lost, if they're getting taken, if they're, you know, getting attacked by animals. A lot of times the puzzle pieces don't match up. Got to be careful sometimes if you're inexperienced. A lot of times these people are very experienced. But this case of Jared Negretti is very unusual, especially with that photograph. I saw that picture and I'm just like, man, that is one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. It reminds me of that shot in the Blair Witch Project when she's filming herself, when things go really bad. Now, the cases I've talked about are pretty weird, but there's one case that's really, really weird. Happened back in 1952. There was a boy named Keith Parkins. He was 2 years old. He was out playing on a cattle ranch with his older brothers in Oregon. And this was in the month of April, I think. Which April is like not the warmest time of year. At night it can get pretty cold. He was playing with his brothers by a barn. I think they were looking at a calf or something that had just been born. When the mother of these kids called them to head back for lunch, the two older brothers went and Keith lingered behind at the barn. And the mom was like, "Where's Keith?" Because he didn't go with the older brothers. She's like, "Where's Keith?" And they're like, "I don't know, he stayed at the barn." So the mother, the parents, they went to find him, and he was gone. He was just gone. So they started searching for him. Eventually they had somewhere up to like 200 people combing the area using more traditional old school search and rescue methods to look for him, but there was no sign of him. Eventually, I think 3 miles away or so, they found his footprints going through a cattle field. Now, the really weird thing is in this case, they ended up finding Keith alive, but unconscious, like face down in a creek, apparently, 12 miles away the next morning. So supposedly, within a period of, I think they say it's 19 hours, this 2-year-old traversed a distance of 12 miles through forest and mountain terrain. His face was all scratched up, his clothes were all ripped up, but he was alive. How did this kid do that? How did he traverse that distance in 19 hours in the dark? Very, very weird, highly mysterious. Some suspect a cat could have grabbed him and carried him, drug him all that way. But it seems weird how he would be alive and not killed or eaten. Do cats do that? I don't even know. Do mountain lions, cougars, do they kill just to kill? I have no idea. But very, very unusual circumstances, and he survived and apparently had no recollection of the incident, and into adulthood has no memory of it. So that's a very, very weird case. What happened to him? How did he travel that distance? Who knows? In the blink of an eye, these people just disappear, and then somehow they turn up, either dead or alive. Most cases, they're dead. You know, somebody stumbles upon the body. But makes you wonder what is actually going on in the forests. Is it Sasquatch? They have an intelligence. They're able to move quickly through the wilderness. They're able to move quickly undetected in the wilderness. They can remain hidden. Is it something even more bizarre? Like, are these people encountering alien beings? Are they getting abducted by UFOs? Is it a case of somebody entering a portal and just vanishing? These are all theories you'll hear. Or is it just something easily explainable? Like a legitimate kidnapping from a human being, an abduction from some sort of creep lurking around in the wilderness? Or is it an animal attack? Or just simply getting lost? Maybe a child is walking along and they see a squirrel or a bird or something and it piques their interest. So they walk off and they just get turned around. That's probably the most reasonable explanation for a lot of these things, but it just seems strange that they would end up so far away. You know, it really doesn't make sense, and it really is bizarre. But anyways, make sure you check out David Paulides' YouTube channel and his work, the Missing 411 documentaries. You can find them online. And he's got a bunch of books that he's written. He's done all the work on this stuff and all the investigating. He's like the top guy. So check out his work. There's a link down below in the description. That's all I wanted to talk about in today's video. These cases are captivating. They're very unusual, kind of creepy, and make you think, you know? They make you think when you're out in the wilderness, what could possibly go wrong? And, you know, just be safe out there and pay attention to your surroundings. Don't do anything stupid. Thanks for watching this video. We'll see you next time on Mountain Beast Mysteries.